had in addition to Sri Mulyani's opening presentation, three really terrific interventions there, I think. And I now want to give the floor to those of you in the room to raise some questions, a few comments, and also to those online. I would ask, please, that you do identify yourself, but also do limit the length of your comment or question so we can really give everyone a chance to contribute. Let me first pass the mic around the floor here. This session really is trying to get to grips with this notion of fit for purpose. How fit for purpose is this sort of space of development cooperation actors for this sort of changing context that we've been hearing about? And we've heard some rather sort of different takes on that, the slightly more perhaps upbeat view and what's beginning to evolve in Asia, and a slight, dare I say, moderately dystopian view possibly emerging on the African side. So, who would like to start off? Brenda. Can we get a mic to Brenda Killin then, please?
Thank you very much. My name is Brenda Killin. I'm head of aid quality at the OECD, so somebody who's worked very closely on these agreements, Accra, Paris, Busan, over the last few years. Really interesting discussions. Also really good new officers. I like the setup. So I'll just get that out of the way now. I found myself listening to some really challenging questions and a description of the way things are moving, which certainly fits what we've found from working in partnership, which are much broader range of actors. I also found myself thinking, well, it ought to be possible really to make some headway in all of these areas, because in many of the areas we have technical solutions, particularly as we heard from the World Bank, the much more real solutions that middle income countries can offer because they've been through these challenges quite recently. We can create financial instruments. We know how to blend. We're sitting in London. We've got this quite creative, in fact, often dangerous creativeness in the financial sector here. So we can do these things, and with new technology, we've got more knowledge about where the needs are and particularly the specific challenges. But what I kept thinking was, how do I tell that story to the donors that I deal with in Paris and the politics of aid? And we're stuck with a clunkingly simplistic narrative around aid and what development is for. So on the one hand, politically, we should be able to say there's global public goods, there's mutual self-interest, there are challenges that will get us all. We've all got to work in partnership. But how do we translate that into action? And action on the, even though it's going down, there's $130 billion of aid, and it's going to be around that level for the next few years. So how do we get change there? The political challenge and the communications challenge.
Okay, great. We'll hold that one. Take notes, everyone. Gentleman at the back there, and then I'll come forward. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Daniel Ottolenghi. I'm from the European Investment Bank. Let me quote just very briefly from the concept note for this conference, where it says that DAC donors are under increasing pressure to justify their aid spending through demonstrating results and value for money. Now, if we observe that the needs for aid development are concentrated increasingly in fragile states and low-income countries, that may well be a misguided concern and might actually get in the way of getting aid flowing to the recipients that need it most. And I wonder whether the discussants on the panel would like to comment on that.
So are you pointing to sort of a contradiction between
there is a definite contradiction there, basic,
VFM in particular?
Absolutely basic contradiction
terrific.
there.
Thank you. Can I to the front, and then we'll sweep over to the right-hand side of the room. To this gentleman here. Thank you.
Good morning, Stefan from the German Federal Ministry for Development. One question that I've been carrying around a few weeks now is that will future development cooperation be still about donor effort or more about recipient benefit? And what should we focus on when especially we do reporting?
Okay, very good. So a lady in the front there, and then one at the back of that segment, and then I'm going to let the panel say a few words.
My name is Nalima Gulrajani from the Global Economic Governance Program at the University of Oxford. We've heard some of the changes that have been sweeping the development field over the last 5 years, let's say, and this field is notorious for changing fads, fashions, and evolving trends. And I guess my question is sort of relates specifically perhaps to the paper dealing with the stress test of aid agencies. Is there such thing as too much adaptation to current trends? What does the future aid agency look like? Surely it also has to be responsive to potential new challenges and new trends. So is too much adaptation a bad thing?
Okay, and just one more at the back there, Heidi.
Yes, this is Nuria Molina, Director of Policy and Research at Save the Children. Two quick questions. One for Andrew. Your projections are largely based on relatively recent trends in growth. Do you think they might be over-optimistic? Second one, it's a bit more general for the whole panel. So I think I've heard with different panel members the proposal, say, to be better fit to this whole new world, to use more blending and leveraging private sector funds. I think this is largely based on an unsaid assumption that this will be cheaper. But I've been trying for a while to actually find evidence, hard evidence, that compares the cost of different types of development finance, including public and private. And I actually haven't found it there. So I would actually ask whether you know if there's something coming up and whether these assumptions are largely based on actually lack of evidence on whether it's cheaper or not.
Great, okay, fantastic. I'm going to ask the panel now. Andrew, can I ask you to ask, there are a couple of specific questions there. One around how much adaptation is actually healthy, in a sense, for the sector, given all these trends, and also a particular question there about the nature of the index and the data.
Yep. Yes, it's possible to be blown about too much and to focus. I mean, this relates to Srimiliani's point about how flexible you're going to be, and do you lose your center of gravity if you become infinitely flexible, even though it's a good thing to adapt to. We're pointing sort of possible directional shifts. The pace and depth of it is really up to individuals. So, for example, you could choose to remain doggedly in a particular niche because you believe it is the right thing, but then you have to explain how you fit with the rest of the architecture. I mean, I'm just giving you one example. You don't have to just go with the herd and transform yourself into whatever the latest fashion is. I mean, that's a very well taken point. The poverty figures are they over optimistic? I think the trend is on fragile states is quite clear. Are we basing ourselves too much on recent high growth episodes? I mean, in fact, the way we do it, and particularly in the way we look at factor productivity, looking back at the big giant economies, it is reasonably robust. You're not, of course, free from a huge accident, which could happen in any and all of the big global levers. Just a couple of quick points on Daniel's point on fragile states. I think that's really going to be the subject of a big probe tomorrow. But I don't think you can equate concreteness of immediate results and value for money. I mean, it is. If you measure only the most easy to measure things, then you would never invest in the kind of institutional transformations that you need for a better tomorrow. And there is a tension there. So I take your point that way, but I think there are now lessons that fragile states are able to absorb aid, and it's going to be coming up but not necessarily as we used to think it. So that will come up. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Can I pass over to you, Dr. Ngosano? I saw you sort of grimace slightly at the point about the assumption of cheaper private finance. Did you have a view on that?
Well, my response would be cost on its own does not tell you much. It's cost effectiveness that you need to address. So do I get a good return for the money I spend as opposed to how much money do I spend? I think that's the way we'd have to look at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Any other
But can I just, the adaptation one I think is sort of intrigues me slightly. I think if I answer it scientifically, if you adapt, there is an implication that you've read the trends as something you cannot change. In other words, the forces at play are bigger than you. If you don't adapt, you die. Okay? And also, I think you adapt if you think the trends are moving in the direction you agree with. Yeah. So if you don't think so, then clearly you take a much more interventionist stance. In other words, I'm going to try and intervene to change the direction of what's going on because I fundamentally don't agree with where it's headed. And I think I've got the strength not to get in the way without getting broken.
It's an interesting development, that. Mr. Sakai, anything that of those questions about that you feel you want to pick up? What about this point about private finance? Do we have any evidence on sort of where where the pricing around private flows are relative to commercial flows through the development banks? For
Maybe
example?
I can. I'm sorry to be a bit anecdotal, but my colleagues in ADB also complain a lot about private, or our hope for getting more funds from private sector to developing countries. If you look at infrastructure financing, there was a very high expectation, maybe 10, 15, like even 20 years ago, and whether the money is actually coming or not. And many people say it has been a disappointment. But I don't think whether we can conclude so quickly in that way. One problem that we are seeing is that there's a huge need for example, infrastructure, filling infrastructure gap. But these are crude needs, and for private sector come in and invest, somebody has to make these needs or translate these needs into project, which is a bankable project. And who is doing that? Maybe not many are doing that, and we are also probably not doing that enough. So there are things that we can do. Also, when we think about private sector, maybe often we not only look at direct financing by private sector of development projects, but if you look at capital market development happening in developing countries, so not linking private money directly to project, but through better development of financial sector, capital market, bond market, there are ways to tap private sector money for the purpose of development. So I'm rather optimistic on this question.
Okay, thank you. Sri Mulyani, there's a question that came in actually in relation to your earlier presentation about the kind of ambitions for IDA 17. Now, you may feel you're able or not able to answer this question right now, but in the light of the discussion that's just been had, is there an expectation that we will continue to see a sort of growing surge in resources around IDA 17, or is the ambition actually one now of, in a sense, maintaining a sort of quasi-cap on IDA 17 because of the range of other flows that are now occupying the space?
Well, the President Kim from World Bank has already mentioned on the annual meeting that he has an ambitious target for IDA 17. But certainly it's really depend on how you are going to define who's the target on IDA 17. If you are going to use the same traditional classification or category, or even in this case by focusing more on a fragile state, definitely the need is going to be much, much lower than what we try to mobilize for 3 years, which is, I think, on the IDA 16, we really reached the record high of almost 50 billion. Because if it is only dealing with a low-income country, or even in this case specifically for the fragile state, the need is not going to be that big for the 3 years. So when you talk about ambition, are you going to measure based on the amount of money that or resource that you are going to mobilize, or you are ambitious in terms of value for money? Each dollar you are going to be able to achieve much better result, or you are going to be ambitious in the sense that you still maintain the client, which as I said, within the bank, we are actually eager not to segment or differentiate client based on that. The IDA, IBRD with much, what you call it, discrete differences. So it's more like a smooth, both in terms of the hardening on a pricing level as well as on a terms and condition. I think this is the area which we still in the process of discussion. Within the bank, we are going to offer the framework in which then we can discuss with potential donor. It is, I mean, from the amount of money, it's especially if it is a track headline, definitely for the president, he really want to be in that level, of course. I mean, the amount of money is definitely also important. But it's then linked to the who's the client of IDA that we are going to serve. And that's why defining the new IDA client is going to be important. I would like to comment on a couple of questions, communication challenges in which you ask. These are we are all facing the same actually challenge of communicating, especially to the policymaker or politician. My own experience as finance minister, the gap between the politician as a parliamentary member in really exercising their budget right. Definitely politician is very myopic. They really want to see more immediate direct result because for them the cycle of voter election is there. So 4 years, 5 years is definitely within their time frame. It's very difficult, especially when you are dealing with a development issue that will require a much longer, and especially when the benefit is not going to be direct but indirect. What is the benefit for me, for my voter, for my political election in this case? So it's really depend on how you see the country playing a role, I think, and that is the evolution. Some country is more like inward looking, they only look at their own voter. Other country which is by nature recognize that their role within their regional or global setting is actually inevitable to be engaged within that cooperation. It will provide more. So I think the lesson learned from here is that engagement among politicians across border is going to be much important. And for many countries, actually, that forum is there. I mean, in Africa, there is a Caucus of Africa. In Asia, you have also the ASEAN plus 3, East Asia organization, Latin America, they also. And then you go even beyond that, like in the World Bank, we have parliamentary member which is organized within the World Bank, PNOP, in which then they can discuss. That will provide a much better perspective about the role which is beyond just the election cycle and direct benefit. But it definitely, I mean, we are more required to be able to provide with a more evidence-based ability to really link the story well about what is the contribution and what does it mean for them as accountability to their taxpayer. If I could also comment the earlier, which is disagree with my statement about whether we are with the poor or with the, I mean, what you're talking about Africa is not a unique Africa. I mean, I have in Indonesia, when you have the elite capture, it's always providing a dilemma for many of us. We want to get engaged with a country which is having the structure, political and this collusion between politics and business interests that then capture a lot of decision-making process, which actually hampering the ability to penetrate directly. There is a hope, at least. I mean, the Arab Spring is one thing. You were in Tunis, and you know exactly well the situation there. But I think that's also not unique. I observe and monitor very closely. It's happened in Indonesia, for example, but also happened in Philippines before, in many other countries in Latin America. So the collusion is there. It creates an obstacle for even any international community to work to even get engaged or provide benefit directly to the poor. But with the new technology, more information, I think the opportunity is much bigger. I'm not saying that the obstacle is totally removed. You really see this, and in the bank, I frequently have to deal with this question. When there is a governance corruption issue, especially at the elite level, should we abandon and stop this one? While at the same time, we've almost convinced that this project is really benefiting and desperately needed to the poor. So the question is how the poor will be then have to be hijacked by this corruption at the elite level. And for us, this question about governance vis-a-vis the benefit is really there. And there is no, again, one size fits all. It's really a sound judgment how you are going to make sure that every dollar that you spend is really going to be benefiting the poor while you're not compromising this corruption and governance principle. I think that's the most important thing. I guess that's all.
Yes, very quickly. And then
not this round of questions, but earlier question, the point about how we can reduce inequality, how we can make growth more inclusive. This is a really difficult question because, as I said earlier, Asian countries have been growing quite fast, and they have been reducing their poverty rapidly. But if you think about the factors for fast economic growth, globalization, financial sector development, use of technology, these are also factors contributing to widening of gaps. So for what we can do, it's really a difficult question. At the same time, if you think about reducing gap by direct transfer, that's also difficult. As Ms. Ringunyani said, it probably won't be sustainable. So what we can do? Now, in my view, well, at least one thing we can do is try to ensure, if not equality in results, but equality in access to opportunities. Because if you are born in poor family, you have less chance of having better education, less chance of having better health care, and you have less chance of having access to opportunities now being created through growth, through private sector. So that is something probably we have to do, but again, it's not simple. Again, as Ms. Ringunyani said, in doing that, we have governance and major issues, but at least we should try to ensure equality in access to opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm going to draw this really terrifically great starting session to a close now. I mean, as I'm thinking on some of the issues that have emerged, I just want to leave you with a few thoughts for going into the rest of the 2 days. I mean, this question of, is it a case of adapt or die, or are we actually sort of fetishizing change to the extent that some of the core purposes of development cooperation are in danger actually of being somehow lost? How much is this change actually contributing to effectiveness, really? How good are our metrics and understandings today of how much change in the last decade within the development cooperation space has contributed to improved effectiveness? Brenda, you might be able to give us the good answer on that one. How much is this variable geometry of accountability, a phrase that I'm going to steal from you? I love that phrase. But how much of that is really the lifeblood of the new development cooperation space? And how much is it potentially putting it at risk? I think we've got lots and lots of questions that we'll want to come back to. I want to thank very much all the fantastic speakers on this opening panel, and now I can release you for some caffeine or whatever you need.